most of you are too young to remember this. You can YouTube it, so you can check it out. Not that you would find it of great humor. I did, because first of all, I'm a child of the 60s, and second of all, I've got a warped sense of humor. But there was this show that was on. I don't remember the name of the show. You can YouTube it. But anyway, they invited Gladys Knight and the Pips, but Gladys Knight didn't show up. And it was just hilarious to me because they introduced them as and the Pips. Not Gladys Knight and the Pips, but and the Pips. And all the Pips did, the three backup singers, was to sing the backup. They didn't sing any of the lead part that Gladys Knight usually had. And so I bet Amy's already found that YouTube video and she's going to link it right. Yeah, she did it. I didn't even think about that. We are now Mark Clifton and Thom Rainer, except this is and Thom Rainer. And I guess if you were not watching me on YouTube, all I did was nod my head. In other words, this is blank and Thom Rainer. I'm going to do a 3-part series. Mark Clifton is on vacation for the month of July, and so that's when we're recording these. And I'm going to do a 3-part series. You are going to enjoy this, not because Rainer is doing it and Clifton's not. I just want to tell you that. That's not the implication, the inference, or the demonstrative statement, any of the three, okay? You will enjoy these because of the topic. And what I love about Church Answers is at Church Answers, we are getting all kinds of information about the church. It is like data overload, and we're trying to parse the data and look at all the things that are happening. In addition to that, we have all the subjective information that comes through consultations, that comes through coaching. So you're going to get some very relevant and new information. And by the way, I just accepted another consultation today. And we are having more consultation requests than any time in the history of the organization. That goes all the way back to when we were Rainer Group, and even way back before that when we were Church Growth Visions in 1988. And we're getting more consultation requests than ever. We're grateful, but it's also indicative that there are many churches that are seeking help. I want these podcasts to be helpful for you. When it's done, when it's complete, I want you to walk away from a podcast, or if you're on YouTube, hello, good to see you. You're seeing me. If you go through a podcast, I want you to be able to say, boy, that was 23 minutes and 14 seconds well spent. That's what I want for this. We're always grateful to the North American Mission Board. And just let me mention, we've mentioned it more than once, look at the link for the North American Mission Board Replant Summit in 2022. Click on that, get some information. You need to look at it. You need to know about it. It is going to be a fantastic event. We want you to know so that you can go. So just look at that link and do that. Now, here is the series. Drum roll, please. Hey, by the way, there's this new a cappella group, and usually the a cappella groups have someone that sounds like an instrument, particularly percussion. And by the way, it's not a new a cappella group. It's new to me, and I'm even trying to remember their name right now. But this a cappella group, like many of the others, they have one of the singers, if you will, one of the people on the team who does the sound effects, and usually it's percussion. And I wish I could do that, because right now I would make myself do a drum roll. I can't do it at all. But and then I would have the clanging of the cymbals. He can do all those things. But here is the series. You ready for it? 3 changes in church practices most of us did not see coming. 3 changes in church practices most of us did not see coming. We could anticipate a lot of things. Some of you may say, yeah, I saw this one coming. Good, you got it. But I can tell you this, most people did not anticipate these 3 changes where we're looking, particularly the magnitude of the changes. I could have predicted 1, 2, or 3 of them, okay? Because we're getting this information from churches around the world, so we have an advantage. But I could not have predicted the magnitude of these changes. So these are 3 changes in church practices most of us did not see coming. This first episode We're going to talk about the dramatic changes in church facilities. Dramatic changes in church facilities. Not too long ago, I was talking to our friends at Brown Church Development Group in Nebraska, and I was talking to the owner, Todd, and I was talking about what was going on with changes in church facilities, and we were just having a conversation about how many church facilities are now focusing upon redoing the worship center and making a larger foyer, just those basic things, and how many more requests there are for that than there have been in the past. Well, what Todd was sharing with me is something that is just endemic across the church landscape, particularly in North America. Dramatic changes in church facilities. So get ready for this one. This first one, you need to focus for just a moment. It's like when I have a conversation with my middle son, Art, who tends to be a little bit distracted. I used to put his head, when he was a little fella, I used to put his head in my hands. And if you're looking on YouTube, I would say, Art, focus, because he would be somewhere else, just totally distracted. So I'm going to tell you, the listener or the viewer, please focus upon this first point, because it's got a lot of numbers in it, but you need to hear the numbers because they are unbelievable to me, truly unbelievable. I would not have guessed these. All right, we're talking about changes in church practices, episode 1, the dramatic change in church facilities. What is the first point I want to communicate to you? The massive decrease in church construction. Truly a massive decrease in church construction. What are the numbers, Thom? I'm glad you asked. Here are the numbers. You focusing on this? 20 years ago, 2002, $8.7 billion was spent on church construction in North America. You got that number? 20 years ago, 2002, $8.7 billion was spent on church construction. Let's move up 10 years. 2012, it goes from 8.7 billion a month to 3.9 billion a month. Cut more than half in a decade. You ready for this one? In 2022, 2.65 billion a month. I want you to understand the magnitude of that. 20 years ago, the expenditures for church facility building and construction 20 years ago was $8.7 billion a month. 10 years ago, all the way down to $3.9 billion a month. Today, $2.65 billion a month. Almost 1/4 of what it was 20 years ago. This particular data point is mainly being looked at by those in the industry and statistical nerds. Well, it is a massive church issue. Some of it reflects the decline in churches in North America for sure, but another part of it reflects church practices that are changing. Of course, that's the title of this 3-part series, 3 changes in church practices most of us did not see coming. And so I'm going to share with you some of those church practices that are causing this massive decrease in church construction, all the way down from 8.7 billion a month to 2.65 billion a month in just 20 years. Or another way of saying it, 3.9 billion a month to 2.65 billion a month in just 10 years. Once again, the level of church construction is just a little over 1/4 of what it was 20 years ago. That has to be one of the biggest changes in church life that is certainly not getting recognized or getting much attention these days. So hang on to that massive decrease in church construction. Okay, what are churches doing? 1, intentional reduction in worship center space. Intentional reduction in church and worship center space. What's going on there? Gosh, there's so many factors contributing to this. The natural assumption is, well, churches are declining, so they don't need as much worship space. For certain, that is one of the reasons. For certain, that is a good explanation, but it's not the totality of the explanation. Another issue that is taking place is the multi movement. When you go multi service, when you go multi venue, when you go multi site, you are now spreading your congregation into multiple slots, time slots, day slots, etc. And you don't need the big room that you once had. So the multi-movement has been a incredible addition to the reasons behind the massive decrease in church construction. Multi-site, well, we moved many of our members to another site. Multi-venue, they may be in the building, but they're in, for example, a fellowship hall instead of the worship center. Or multi-services, they're all in the same room, they're just at different times. All of these are contributing to the need for smaller worship venues. So you have worship attendance down, you have the multi-movement. What else do you have? Well, you have basically, some people will debate Sam and me on this, but I think it's happening. No, I know it's happening. The decline of the megachurch movement. The number of megachurches had stabilized, but I think when we began to get good numbers for 2021, 2022, post-pandemic, we're going to see a lot of megachurches that are no longer at 2,000 in worship attendance, particularly 2,000 in worship attendance in person. Many of them are counting their digital, but you don't have to make space for digital. And so that is a contributing factor as well. You have fewer big, huge churches. And so therefore you are not needing that space that you once had. Another reason behind it, I alluded to it when talking about megachurches, is just digital attendance. We thought we would be, some of us at Church Answers, thought that digital worship attendance would be a factor post-COVID because we saw that many churches, that's all they had. We probably overestimated it. Quite frankly, what we're looking at in digital worship attendance is not really the levels that we have expected. It hasn't, for most churches, it does not have the sticky factor that we thought it would have when we began to look at how many people had migrated to that. And it depends on how you count views, whether it's through Facebook, a few seconds, or YouTube, or just only those who visit your site and watch it. There's just so many ways to count it. There's no singularity in there. But digital worship attendance definitely has caused the overall in-person worship attendance to go down, which means you don't need worship center space as much. The big thing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was building big worship centers, big relative to the size of the church. As a matter of fact, one of those church growth principles that was somewhat sacrosanct was you need to build ahead of your growth. And so many churches built far beyond what they would ever need, thinking that they were preparing for the future. Well, we're seeing that change. And now another thing that's happening in the intentional reduction at worship space, another thing that has happened is the generations, particularly Gen X and millennials, but even Gen Z, maybe even more than those. The younger you get, the more pronounced it is. Just are not attracted to these big venues. What is the psychology behind it? What is the rationale? Well, there's still more work to be done to be able to share that information. But again, that is another contributing factor to the intentional reduction in worship space. Okay, what did we not see coming? The massive decrease in church construction. Secondly, the intentional reduction in worship center space, especially to the degree that we are seeing it now. Oh, let me just put in one more factor about worship space. Right, these days, having vacant seats is no longer considered as negative as it once was. COVID has caused us to be accustomed to having a little more room, people not directly by us. I recently went to a movie. Okay, I'll confess, it was Top Gun. Probably one of my two favorite movies of all time, along with Forrest Gump. I love those two movies. But Nellie Jo and I went at not a prime time. It was probably like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but early evening, hoping that we would have a lot of space. Well, what happened was 2 people sat by me. It was almost the end of the world for an introvert. I mean, And we had those big, comfortable seats that you can turn into recliners, and they serve you food in the theater and all that kind of stuff. So it was plenty of room. But I had this woman next to me, and her husband was, I guess, her boyfriend was on the other side. People aren't supposed to sit next to me outside of my family. And she did. And I'm just thinking, why couldn't I have had a vacant space? Made me realize, because I go to so few movies, I go so infrequently, I'm going to splurge in the future. And if Nellie Jo and I go, I'm going to go buy 4 seats. I'm going to, because we can get them reserved, and I'm going to buy 4 seats. I'm going to splurge. I know that you think that as a waste of stewardship, but I'll double up on my tithes and offerings as a result of that splurging. That's how people feel in church. It's okay if somebody's not sitting next to me buttock to buttock. It's okay that there's space. It's okay that we're half full. That is more the attitude these days. Well, I'm getting stuck on reduction in worship space. Let me go to massive decline in education space. Education space was largely built by two movements, and they're both Baptistic. The Independent Baptist movement, but even more so, the Southern Baptist Sunday School movement. Those were the two movements that emphasized building education space. I am not suggesting that there were other movements, denominations, and independent or non-denominational churches that did the same thing, that built education space. But largely the Independent Baptist movement, and then even more so the Southern Baptist Sunday School movement. It was a good thing in many ways. The good thing was when somebody would come to a Sunday school class or some type of small group held in education space, there was a sticky factor, especially if it was on campus, especially if it was connected to a worship time. And it was really a sticky time. Well, churches are not building education space. There's a plethora of reasons for that. One of the reasons is money. Another reason is zoning, and laws are becoming more and more strict about your ability to build facilities. Another one is the disproportionate emphasis on worship over discipleship teaching. There's a lot of reasons behind it, but we did not see the massive decline in education space that we once did. Now, here's where I'm encouraged. Churches that did build for that education space are now moving toward 7 day a week usage. Yes, they have it for their worship time small groups are tied to a worship time, but also you're seeing more and more schools that use this education space. You're seeing the homeschool movement, probably one of the fastest growing movements in America right now. You're seeing them use that space sometime. So those that have the education space are finding that there's ways to have ministry to use it. So that's the third thing we did not see it. Now, related to that is this fourth thing, the eager acceptance of non-traditional space. I thought only a few outside of the box, kind of not much in line with what the rest of the world is doing churches. That's a big hyphenated adjective. I thought those were the only churches that would have industrial space as a worship center, office space, you name it. Now it has just become so common for churches to have non-traditional space. In fact, it is becoming so common that it is no longer uncommon. Again, this is not a new trend, but this is a trend that we did not see to the degree that it is today. And again, most of it is related to accelerated building costs. I mean, try to build a new building in today's inflationary environment. Lots of luck there. That's not a theologically correct statement, but you know what I'm talking about. And so if you find a warehouse, if you find industrial space that's affordable, you go for it. I am in a church that meets in a form of industrial space. My youngest son, is the pastor. It is very non-traditional. It has its advantages, certainly costs, but it has some disadvantages too. The layout is not what you would really want. It's just it's total shotgun. I mean, we go straight back with it because that's the only open space we had where they used to do a lot of the industrial work. But many churches are now in non-traditional spaces. Not a surprise that it happened, but a surprise that it happened to the degree it has. Okay, fourth and finally. No, this is fifth and finally. The renovation of dying churches that were adopted. That's a facility issue. It's not just an ecclesiastical issue. It is a facility issue because when these churches that are dying are adopted, they usually have a good amount of deferred maintenance. And as a result, the church that adopts them has to go in and renovate them. That has become a facility movement unto itself. As that the renovation may be as basic as painting, or it may be great infrastructure with electrical, plumbing, and HVAC. But we're seeing more and more of these churches that have become adopted, that were once dying. These are the churches that are being renovated. Now, those are just 5 things that are happening. Massive decrease in church construction, intentional reduction in worship space, massive decline in education space, eager acceptance of non-traditional space, and the renovation of dying churches that have been adopted. 5 major trends. Things that maybe we saw coming, but we did not see coming to the degree that we did. Wow, who would have thunk it? Who would have thought these things would be so pervasive and prevalent in this year, in 2022, in this post-COVID era? But they are. Well, we got a lot more to talk about. We're talking about 3 changes in church practices most of us did not see coming. We just finished in this episode the dramatic changes in church facilities. Episode 2 will begin to talk about the amazing increase in the number of teaching pastors. Did you see it coming? Maybe you did, but did you see it coming to the degree that it is? We'll talk about that more when we return to this series, and you'll be able to see us on YouTube and wherever you are downloading your podcasts audibly. Hey, if you're on YouTube, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, a like. Same thing with your podcast. Give us some good reviews. We bring this to you as the ministry of the North American Mission Board, and we want to get it to as many people as possible. Come back for the next episode, 3 changes in church practices, where we'll talk about the rapid increase in the number of teaching pastors. We'll see you then.